everybody. I'm glad to be here today. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's here, and especially thank you for the scientists and citizen scientists that are out there that are presenting today. It takes a lot to stand up and do what you feel is right, and I wanted to thank everybody for doing that, whether they're with federal agency or whether they're here in Jefferson County. So I'm here just really to talk about how this impacts our health here in Jefferson County. So I'm a family physician, and it was nice to hear Dr. Wilson say, hey, local matters, because when you think about it, who has a better understanding of the healthcare system here but the folks that work in it day to day. So let's see. I did not get trained in the utilization of this first. Okay, all right. So I'll tell you about myself in a second, but I just wanted to discuss the objectives really today. We'll just talk about the Jefferson County health demographics, and then review current and planned healthcare services available in Jefferson County, and then really conceptualize or think about really what that means for us on a local level. And just a little bit about me, since local matters, yay. I've been in West Virginia for 16 of the past 19 years, and I've lived in 5 different counties within the state of West Virginia, but I practice full spectrum family medicine here in Jefferson County since 2014, and that includes office-based care, in the hospital care of kids and adults, and also obstetrics. So I feel like I have a pretty good exposure to a variety of different populations, and sometimes that's pretty helpful. But I recently went to across the river to start a family medicine training program up at Meritus, and working still for West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine. So I have nothing to disclose. Yay, isn't it nice to say that? But anyway, this is really just, health and what matters. This is a lot of verbiage on this slide, but really what I want you to see is that, the World Health Organization is saying, what is health? Well, health is more than just the absence of disease. Health is a state of well-being, mentally, emotionally, physically. And so what are all the things that contribute to that, right? We've heard a lot today about all the contributors to that, social, economic, and then individual characteristics, so the epigenetics, even getting into that type of thing, and whether you're a smoker or not, your behaviors. And then also, so we're looking really at income as social status, education, physical environment, social support networks, genetics, your personal behavior and coping mechanisms. What are your health services in the area, which we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about, and then whether you're male or female. So really that's what I just want to kind of present to you guys, is really the Jefferson County population demographics. And you'll see that I try to put the years up here because some of this stuff is recent, real time. Matter of fact, you'll even see data there from March 2019. But then some stuff when we get into the asthmas there's just been nothing published since 2006. So that's kind of, you are as good as your data, right? So reasons we need to collect, right? So our population has grown significantly since about the 1980s, where we were at about 20,000 people. Now we're up to the 55.6 thousand mark. Our median age is 40. Mostly white, 12% African American or Hispanic, about half of our population is employed, and that impacts because we know that social determinants of health matter. And you can see that our unemployment rate is the lowest in the state at 3.2%. The state average there you see is 5.3, and you notice our median house income, which is significantly above the state average, so 72.5 thousand per household, and West Virginia median at 44,000. The poverty rate of 9.91% is actually not so bad comparative to the nation as a whole, and certainly the state as well. And you can see where we stack up over there on the bar column, and we've got our neighbors in there: Clark County, Virginia, Frederick County, Virginia, and you can see, we're actually a little bit more on par with them comparative to the state of West Virginia as a whole. So, boy, we're pretty healthy as far as it goes. So, we're comparative to the state of West Virginia. So we've got nowhere to go but up, and so we are. It's true. Our governor ran on. Tired of being last, this matters. This stuff matters, okay? So our health outcomes are number 1, and our length of life is number 3. overall, so the numbers in parentheses are the West Virginia state average. So you can see that in terms of premature deaths, so deaths that could be prevented, we're 3,000 lower than the state average. And then when you ask people how would they rate their health, poor or fair, we also are below the state average there, 18% comparative to 24% in the state. And then when you ask people, hey, how many days, would you define yourself as, poor physical or mental health? Again, we are also below the state average. Our low birth weight is pretty similar. And then nicely, as the doctor in me is loving the fact that the adult smoking is less than the state average there, but still 19%. Wow. So this chart here is actually a chart of the diabetes rates in Jefferson County compared to the state of West Virginia. And all this data you guys can find. It is so much fun to just mine this data. This is countyhealthrankings.org. And then I also pull a lot of stuff from the American Lung Association and the EPA, and the DEP has some nice reports out. And so you can read all of this, and there's lots of nice pictograms. And what you'll see often is that the Eastern Panhandle and Jefferson and Berkeley counties really tend to be that lighter color. And then some of the counties either up in the Northern Panhandle or, McDowell County, some of the more, the counties that are struggling really with multiple difficulties. So really just to get into the details, and we'll talk about why this monitoring really matters, because you've actually got, a medical community that's pulling in all this data about hospitalizations and ER visits and number of deliveries and number of transports and all this other stuff. And so you can actually line up your data with this data. So what are we as a county? So this is by the numbers here, and I just took a count of all the docs I knew. So I apologize if somebody's retired and I did not count you, I apologize. But in terms of folks in practice, we have 13 family physicians and 18 additional family medicine residents, and those are really apprentices. So they've finished medical school and then they've gone on to their specialty training in family medicine. And that's based out of Harpers Ferry. So no big surprise that Harpers Ferry Family Medicine, which houses that residency for 18 family physicians, is the busiest practice in the county with 33,000 patient visits per year. We have a handful of pediatricians, so 4 total, split between Harpers Ferry and Ranson, and I'm counting Dr. Jones here in the both pediatrician and internist category, since he's med peds. But we also have 4 internists, and then 1 geriatrician in Ranson. We have 2 WVU OBGYNs and 1 that works for Valley Health in Ranson. And then we have 2 also fellows, so they carry quite a bit of the work as well. We've got nurse practitioners and mid-levels, and then other additional services. You can see that, sports medicine counts into this, sort of a subspecialty of primary care. Addiction medicine is obviously very much primary care these days. And thanks to Dr. Yellett and Dr. Matunis for being in Kearneysville with Renovo. And then the health department, of course, hospice, and there's 3 urgent care offices. So I have worked actually in Jefferson Medical Center, Harpers Ferry Family Medicine, Women's Health and Family Medicine in Ranson, and then also the urgent care out on 340. So I've been in a variety of these practices over the past 5 years. And then we have a good amount of support services. I think that's really something that's really seen as a significant need, but that's growing. So now the upshot is that we are pretty healthy and we do a good job by and large of staying out of the hospital. So, so in terms of preventable hospital stays, we are below the state average. And so that is sort of in spite of the fact that we are quite underserved. So we have more patients at 1,880 people per doctor in Jefferson County than even the state on average. So we are underserved, and there are multiple reasons for that. And you can see in this graph here, this is really the ratio of number of patients or folks to number of doctors. And you can see that it's declining, which is a good thing. So you want more doctors per person, and that's moving in that direction. You can see the state of West Virginia actually mirrors the national average quite closely. And you should know also that we're in the midst of a 200,000 physician doctor shortage in the United States. So that's impacting public health significantly. Hence me wanting to train more family docs. So a little bit more, so the practices in Jefferson County, especially Harpers Ferry being a training site, is really geared towards taking care of a really broad spectrum of healthcare. So, in my opinion, you always want a training site in your community. It's a huge boost to the quality of medical care that's received, and then also, when you look at the docs that practice in this county and also Berkeley County, you will see many of the graduates of the Harpers Ferry Family Medicine residency. So, in terms of growing our own and keeping our own and really impacting the health of the community, that's really one way that it can be done, and we're very lucky to have that. So more about Jefferson. So I'll tell you where it is now, really, and because I know that the hospital's changed over years, but I think that the addition of academic medicine to the hospital really probably was a big turning point from what I understand of the history of the hospital. And you should know that it's one of the top 100 critical access hospitals in the country, and that award has been bestowed twice in the past 6 years. So they also get awards in COPD care and newborn safe sleep designation, miswired hospitals, that kind of thing. So it's a small hospital, but you should understand, I think, that the quality of care, at least in my opinion, I delivered my own child there. I brought my sister there for delivery. I really feel that the quality of care is very high there. So it's a small hospital, and sometimes that gets confused with the quality of care. But you should know what a critical access hospital is, and that's really what Jefferson Medical Center is. So you can see these the other support services here, 18-bed ER, and OBGYN. Jefferson just delivers down to 36 weeks by and large, and that will come into play here in a minute. General surgery, orthopedics, radiology, and then day surgery for ear, nose, and throat, eye doctor, urology, and then nephrology and pulmonology. We have the option to consult, but they don't round regularly. And then a lot of ancillary services, so dietetics, lactation, pharmacy, et cetera. So what are critical access hospitals? So in the 1980s and 90s, there was a string of closures of rural hospitals that significantly impacted the care that people could receive in their own communities and really contributed to a lot of problems. And so the feds saw that and said, oh my gosh, how can we stop this from happening? Created the critical access hospital designation. And so what this does is it has a set of criteria to qualify. And you can see from the map that they really are, scattered across the entire country. There's 1,300 plus different critical access hospitals. And what it does is it reimburses at slightly higher rate because, you think about it volume-wise, your administrative costs are, pretty much set, right? And then you've got, if you're not doing tons and tons of volume, then you're going to have to bring in a little bit more revenue. So that's how that works. And also too, they're really viewed as being, critical for the community, and Jefferson is located right in downtown Ranson. So you should know Jefferson by the numbers here. So this is 23,900 emergency room visits per year. So just to put that in context, I'm now at Meritus, and so I will tell you that they got 50,000 ER visits per year. So that's kind of big because Meritus is a 297-bed hospital and Jefferson's 25-bed hospital. So when you look at the ratio there, they're really doing some, there's a significant amount of volume that goes through that ER. And 1,500 hospital admissions and 182, babies delivered this past year. This is 2018 data. And on average, the census is almost 15. So I'm about to move on to what's, in the impacts I think that we can maybe, anticipate to some degree. But before I do that, does anybody have any specific questions just about the details of healthcare in Jefferson County?
I have a question. I moved out here about 6 years ago full time, and I already was on Medicare when I moved here. And I'll tell you, it's really hard to get a doctor around here that will take Medicare if you were not on Medicare before you went there. So for people who are moving to this area from the city or someplace else, it's really hard to find a doctor who will take Medicare.
Yeah.
That's a question about access to care.
Yeah, and so that's another place where the training programs actually are really bring a lot of robust, opportunity for people. We're still underserved, so it is frustrating. But they take TRICARE, Medicare, Medicaid, all private insurances. Matter of fact, I'm unaware of any insurance that they do not take at WVU. So. I think having a variety of physicians and practices is important, but it is nice that the university views that as an important factor. Okay. So you're thinking, okay, we got a hospital that is 25-bed critical access hospital, great at caring for, COPD exacerbations and pneumonia and sepsis, and, what a physician would call bread and butter medicine, right? What we don't have cardiology consultation. We don't have, a ability to ventilate children. We've got a 5-bed, Jefferson has a 5-bed ICU. So the average length of stay needs to be less than 48 hours. So when a doctor is doing an admission and says, how long is this person going to be here? Are they going to need multiple additional care? They're going to say, well, this person has got, a cancer that's, causing, maybe issues in the brain. I mean, we don't have an oncologist here, so I'm not going to keep that person. That person would be transferred from the emergency room. So we don't have a direct observation pediatrics beds, and we don't have, Jefferson doesn't have the ability to ventilate peds. So, meaning on a ventilator, a breathing machine. So those are things that impact significantly. There's no NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. So why don't they deliver down below 36 weeks? Well, because what are you going to do with that baby if that baby needs help breathing for a prolonged period of time, needs specialty care? You have to think about transport. But I tell you, having access to care in a hospital that's in your local environment with nurses who know you and doctors who know you is worth its weight in gold. And, if you have to be transported, you have to be transported. It's okay. But having the option is wonderful. So let's look at Jefferson County. What are the at-risk populations? And we already heard about what, asthma is, this is going to impact kids and it's going to impact older adults. And basically it's going to impact everybody, the question is to what threshold? And I did want to say, just sort of an aside, I want you to know, how amazing is the human body, right? This is every symptom that we are seeing, everything that we are all concerned about is the body's trying to heal itself. It's trying to heal, right? So it's trying to prevent particulate matter from getting down deep into the lungs. It's trying to, continue to grow and develop even under oxidative stress. There's a lot of redundancies in different biochemical pathways in the body. This is really an amazing organism, and doctors what we are trying to do is to identify what are the stressors that is preventing the healing. What are the stressors that are preventing a body from living in health? And then you identify those stressors, and then you try to remove those stressors. So the point is to remove the cause. So everything we're talking about, I just wanted to bring it back to the amazing resiliency of the human body here. So these are all symptoms, right? So these are symptoms that there's something wrong, and it's our responsibility to do something about it in our community. So symptoms of adult asthma, that tightening of the airway, that increase in sputum production, heart disease, diabetes, on down the line. So these are the numbers, and I hope you can see them. If not, I could kind of read them off to you. Thanks. So everybody's already talked about a lot of this stuff. Some of the data that didn't get discussed, I don't think, was reducing particulate matter 2.5 by 10 micrograms per cubic meter will help reduce deaths from heart disease by 15%. So we didn't really talk too much about that heart disease component, but that's still one of the most modifiable. And then when you look at particulate matter, I just wanted you to have an idea. So you see these little gray X's all over the United States map, and we'll look at here at West Virginia. Jefferson County's at 9.6 concentration. Those X's are modeled data, okay? So that's not real data. It's extrapolated by very smart people using, numbers which are as good as we can get, but still not ideal. So, when we add heavy industry, or in this situation, just based off the air quality permit, we're adding, 134 tons per year of particulate matter 2.5, or we're adding 154 tons per year of particulate matter 10. And the question is what's the concentration going to be, right? Because this number up here, 9.6, is our concentration. So when we measure, we start to know. So these are the health risks. They've already been reviewed significantly. And so the question is, how will increased rates of all of this impact us, right? Okay, so Dr. Smith can correct me if I say anything incorrect, whatever. But so let's say you have a 6-year-old and he has a history of asthma and he's at school and it's cold outside and he goes out for recess and he's already now exposed to 2 triggers for asthma. He's exposed to cold air and he's exposed to exercise, right? So, okay, he knows he has asthma. He starts feeling tight in the chest. And so he's going to go to his teacher and say, hey, Ms. Smith, I feel like I'm starting to have an attack. I need my inhaler. Get to the school nurse who's carrying the inhaler, get him administer his inhaler. He's either going to get better or he's not. And so let's say his airways start to open up a little bit. He's breathing a little bit easier. You're going to closely monitor him, but he may not need to leave school. You're going to call the parent. So let's say he doesn't get better, right? Let's say you administer the inhaler, but he's still really tight. He's wheezing. He's, struggling to breathe, and you're starting to get really scared, right? The school nurse is starting to get scared. She's like, okay, I got to call his mom. He needs to go to the hospital. So you take him to the hospital, okay, which you have in your community because you got a critical access hospital. And he's still working. So he comes into the emergency room. The triage nurse says, okay, get him back to a bed real quick because he looks like he's struggling. You get him back in there and you give him, a nebulized albuterol, and then you give him semi-racemic epinephrine and you maybe give him a steroid and you're constantly reassessing. The ER doctor's reassessing. How's he doing? If he's not really turning around by that point, then you're going, this isn't good. This kid's going to have to be admitted. And maybe you're thinking about giving magnesium. What's his oxygen saturation? What's the amount of oxygen he's requiring via a mask, supplemental oxygen? So Jefferson Hospital is not going to keep a kid requiring any more than 4 liters of oxygen. They're not going to keep a kid that's going to receive any magnesium because the concern is that child may need to be intubated. And if that happens, then that would not stay at Jefferson. That would go to a higher level of care. And in some situations, that does not even include Berkeley Medical Center in Berkeley County. That we're talking about Morgantown or DC Children's. Okay, so you say, all right. Now we've got to stabilize this high acuity child in an 18-bed emergency room with other people who are also acute. So, you're taking good care of him, but as a physician, you want to be able to get him on the road and get him into the hospital and get him admitted as soon as possible. So you call in for transport. You're going to do an ER to ER transport. Can you fly? Is the weather okay? If the weather's bad, you can't fly, okay? You have a flight, you automatically have a paramedic, but let's say you don't have a flight. Let's say you got to go by ground. Well, if you got to go by ground, do you have an EMT or do you have a paramedic? There's different teams available. You need to be able to closely monitor this child, be ready to potentially intubate in transit, and then also, administer medications. So this is all going through a physician's mind, and, what you want to do is get them to where they need to be as soon as possible. So sometimes this process gets delayed more than we would like, and the thing is that this is the reality of healthcare. And it doesn't matter, you could have, let's say you could have 100 operating rooms or you could have 100 ER beds. You could still have that 101st patient, that is still going to fit into this situation. So this is an issue no matter how large your hospital is. So then you look at, the additional dangers and the transport costs and all this other stuff. And so this matters, because the state is going to be keeping track of we're keeping track of transports, we're keeping track of admissions. And now we have data, especially even with sugar sweetened beverages and everything, that is saying these are the costs of inaction. If we do not act, this is what it costs us. And so when you guys can come in and say, here's the data, here's the air quality, this is where this kid was in school, these are the number of kids that are being sent to the emergency room. Okay, let's correlate that. What is the cost of that transport? What's that cost of hospitalization? So this all really matters. And so this is just some of that older data from asthma in West Virginia here, which I couldn't find anything newer for. And then I just, wanted to talk some a little bit about that. This was a hazardous air pollutants. So next we're going to ask some questions in the panel. And these are some resources you guys can use. So thanks very much for having me here. Joseph Baccario is the next presenter.
Hi, everybody. It's Bocchiaro, actually, but it's all good. So it's so nice to be speaking to friends for a change. So this is a real treat, and most of you know what that means. I'm sorry to say, and thank you for staying through nap time for this closing part of the session. And Patricia Stevenson asked if I would do this because of an initiative that came out of our efforts because of the proposed factory. And so this is sort of a combination of an update and a personal story of how we got here. So I've moved here with Lynn. Most of you know my wife, Lynn. A year and a half ago, we moved from Reston, Virginia. Downsizing, our kids are gone. We came with our dog, Coda. Most of you know him. And so we're here because it's so beautiful and clean. And thought it'd be a great place to retire someday. Not yet. But what we've all been educating ourselves and each other about all of these many months, people have sort of championed different components of the struggle. And one of the questions, the very first questions that we asked when we found out what was going on back last August, was, what does this all mean? And it led to the first question, which is, how does health protection get done? So this is my attempt to get help with all of that. So the first question is, when I'm sitting on my deck, what will I be breathing, and is it enough to make me sick? Pretty simple question, right? So that's where I started out the journey, was, well, how is this going to affect me and my family? And where do you start? So you start with other questions. What are the pollutants? What is the quantities? The quantities specifically on my deck. And the water. We have well water, most of us do. How does it get around? What's the dispersion? Got a great meteorological review of that today with the inversions and so forth. The karst geology was brought up with the water flows and so forth. So all of these things, and some of them are compounding questions, like what is the interaction with other pollution that's already there, or even what we're and how is this going to affect us? What is the health risk? And particularly in this case, what can go wrong? And we know a lot of the answers to some of these things, but we still don't know how it will affect us, because like we've heard with all these different discussions today, we don't know what the weather patterns and the geography and the geology are going to do to this. But there's another whole dimension to the question, and how many of you don't feel like this poor worried woman? All the time, right? And all the other things too. A lot of them that stress you out, but they're not immediately measurable with an air quality sensor. And worrying, anxiety, and so forth. A lot of helplessness. So the helplessness, a lot of us have turned into action. And the action is first finding out the nature of the problem. So I think a lot of you kind of know that this is like the storyline of what our combined research has been. What are the products? We started out, people didn't know, what is this thing? What do they make? What's in it? Where does it come from? How do they make it? What's the process? What comes out of that process? What is the pollution that comes out? What are the emissions and so forth? How did it get approved? So there's sort of a scientific and a political and an economic thread to this whole thing, which has become a social thread, and the funding, and then finding out that there's been obfuscation of the information from us, and then getting down into the obfuscation of how the infrastructure is being planned for all of this too. And so people have gone on tangents with the pipelines for the gas and the sewer and all of these all these other side issues. So it's become very, very complicated. So my next question, why should we have to research all of this stuff? And I think Dr. Surkamp, if I said that right, mentioned that. Why should we have to do this? So the universe of the products first interested me because of my background as an engineer, and because I kind of understood it. I worked in a steel plant up in Buffalo when I was in college. It was a great summer job. And getting into what the products are for and what they're made of, what they do with them, and then finding out when the products are used in architectural and actually now horticultural purposes, which is an interesting part. I started to actually, because I do this for a living, work in the architectural field, asking people all over the country, what do you use this stuff for? And one of the comments you get, I've had construction workers tell me that they hate this because it's abrasive and they hate working with it. They don't like the safety equipment. I've heard studies about health effects of mesothelioma, for instance, because of breathing it. And looking into the alternatives of the products, like does it have to be this stuff? Can it be whatever, hemp or even seaweed? But my biggest question, one of my biggest, I still haven't, this is so complicated, is the embodied energy of the product. When you make something like this and you melt rock, you use a lot of energy. And so the whole purpose of the product is to save energy, right? If it's insulation, then you're making a building more efficient so that you're saving energy. So what is the balance of, if I make it, how much energy is in it versus how much will I actually save? That's a very, very hard question to answer, and we don't really have an answer to that. So I don't know if it's a product I would support. And so I've baffled a lot of architects with this. When I say a lot, I mean dozens of people I've spoken to over the last 6 months really scratch their heads and say, that's a great... But then I say, well, okay, what about the healthcare expenses of everything we talked about today? Balancing out what the benefits of the product for saving energy and the energy that's embodied, and then the healthcare problems that it can create. Wow, it's just a terrible, convoluted mess. So then the next question is, who is protecting us? Who's protecting me? What is the background? And I didn't know any of these things. Most of us didn't. We've had to figure it all out. Is it a federal thing? Is it state, county? Is it the city? Is it big business? And we've found through FOIA mostly that it's all of these different levels of our government have conned, I think was your word, right? Conned, yeah. So some great stuff I wrote down. So I think most people think the government is acting in their best interest. And I think they I don't know, maybe, but I know a lot of people in this room don't. But the next thing was, okay, well, I need to start asking people on an individual basis. So a lot of you have walked around your neighborhoods. I certainly have been doing that every day. I actually have little cheat sheets with me to hand out to people, and we've all reached thousands, tens of thousands of people. And the question was, that they have is, well, how is it going to affect us, and who can help us to solve this? So I asked the question, who can help me? And who do we trust? Who's going to make a difference? What level of government or whatever is going to help us, and where's the teeth? And back in, I guess it was August or so, a lot of us lobbied our Board of Education to do a health assessment, and that seemed like such a powerful thing, right? We're going to get an answer. They're going to have this thing done, and they're going to be consulting experts that are going to do this research based on all of this data that's already out there, and maybe some more. And we'll have an answer. How will it affect us? Well, we still don't know. So as you know what happened, the whole rigmarole of the gradient health assessment and so forth. But when that all fell apart, a lot of us started to say, well, let's find an alternative. And where do we go for an alternative to a private consulting firm? And so that's where I started this next part of the journey. So I needed to find a place where they're outside of the system, but they're informed by the system, by the rules. And there's this dynamic that's been kind of danced around today that I didn't really understand. But the dynamic is between health protection and environmental protection. And we've heard representatives, we haven't had anybody from the EPA, but we've had some good info about it, some negative comments too. And the rules originally written for pollution controls by industry stakeholders, and this balance goes up and down with politics. You see, I have my March for Science on because it occurred to me a few years ago to join that movement because I recognized how important the data we already have and all of our smart scientists that work in our government have amassed, and how we need to be able to trust that, and we need to have access to it. But we are now in an era where there's corruption in the transfer of science and being able to inform our public policy, or it's ignored or suppressed or deliberately misinterpreted, and that's very, very troubling to me. So I felt backed into a corner. A lot of us do. So here's your choice. Here's my next question at the bottom. Either I trust the government's pollution regulations, or I wait until I get sick and then request a study. Those are your options, actually, in the status quo right now. I think that kind of came up today, but there it is in black and white. That's the way it works. So it's upside down. It's just like wrong. Aren't we missing a whole critical middle step where, okay, so we have a situation in our backyard where the development approval is legal. It's permitted through Department of Environmental Protection. The pollution is legal, right? So now that opens the door to multiple companies, so more industry, and each one of those then can be permitted and legal. And then you get this aggregate in time of multiple polluters, all legal and permitted. So the aggregate pollution potential is just astounding. And then there's this whole thing of, well, how do these pollutants interact once they're in the air and the sunlight hits them and all these, all of these chemical compounds coming together. We don't really know what that could be at all. So the CDC was our next step. So when the gradient consulting was thrown out because of the appearance of bias, which seems very legitimate, actually it was Dennis Flynn. His wife works somewhere, and you've seen him at some of the protests, but she's somehow related to or works with NIOSH. So that agency protects workers' health. That was not for us. I called them. They told me to talk to the ATSDR, which they did, and they told me that yes, that they could do these studies and that we could write letter petitions and that we could have potentially a study done. No promises, but at least the process was started, right? So that was the beginning of March. It was March 7th. That was the day the letter came out on a Friday from the Board of Ed that we immediately turned around and started it. So the recourse, since we don't have that study, it turns out that we found out this week that CDC does not do those studies, and they never did. But 4 people in the CDC told me that they do, and that's why we wasted a couple months going down that road. So It's really kind of sad. I just wasted a couple months, and a lot of people in this room this time, including Dr. Fida. So thank you for that. But now, what is the recourse? So our recourse originally, you know all these things we've done, right? We've got angry at the company. We've done all kinds of activism. We've had public protests, letters, lobbying, getting the word out, social media, the newspaper. We have media here. Thank you for covering our cause. We've petitioned agencies. We've now started nonviolent direct action. There have been 2 actions so far. And now what's next? Possibly boycotting the product, casting more doubt. I don't know. So some of today's talks, particularly air monitoring, that's troubling. I don't want to have to start doing that and not giving up. I don't think that if we have to start doing baselining and buying equipment and so forth, so that we can have a lawsuit 5 years from now when people get sick, it just seems just upside down to me. But if collectively we decide that this is something we should do, then this is another whole era that we're entering into hazmat and lawsuits on top of the ones we already have, air monitoring, water monitoring, and so forth, health screening. It goes on and on and on. So I still have the question, when I'm sitting on my deck, will I know what I'm breathing and know that it's enough to make me sick? So here's the call to action. I'm going to just come back to the slides, and this is just one of those happy little inspiring things you can read. And I think everybody in this room is a concerned person that's trying to solve a problem. I also have a set of resource links that can be helpful. You'll see AIR now is on there too. But the call to action going into the panel discussion is, what do we do next? Where do we take this conversation? Who else in our neighbors do we get involved with? How do we align with some of the visions that we have for our community? So thank you.
Marketing, I don't know. What do I do?
So it depends if you're worried about indoor air pollution or outdoor air pollution. If you're worried about indoor air pollution, yes, they have been shown to be effective, and there's a couple of intervention studies that have used filters to improve asthma in children and COPD in adults, actually, but that's only if you inside. You can there's a limit to the surface area that they can clean, so they're usually not as effective like in the big classroom and things like that. But
in your house, you're saying it's
for depending on the pollutant, right? So if you're worried about particulate matter, larger particulate matter, yes. The ultrafines, we don't know yet, and gases and vapors, it depends on the air cleaner. So they're not the panacea. I don't know if a physician wants to say another.
Indoor air quality is a big deal in architecture, has been since LEED started. You might have heard of LEED buildings about 20 years ago. And you have to have fresh air. Schools, and so the way that's done in a big building like a school is you have air handling equipment that actually has a flap somewhere that opens up and lets fresh air in. A lot of times that's not filtered. My understanding from asking some of the facilities people in our county is that's filtering is not a thing right now, and like you would say, it shouldn't be. But you do have to refresh the air, or otherwise people get sick just from breathing in, too much CO2.
I am really inspired today by hearing so many speakers, and one question that I feel is still hanging in the air is, I would ask you each individually for a short answer on what, in your opinion, either professional or personal, are things that we can be doing to move forward from today.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a really broad approach to this, and I'm going to say that this is a source, a point source, and there are a lot of other areas in our lives that we can make improvements. We are number one in expenditures on diabetes. We are number one in rate of diabetes. Our children now, we know, are drinking 20% of them no water in a given day. There are a lot of toxins that come in from foods. There are a lot of indoor air toxins. And I think that if we can take care of all of the things that we can control more easily, then that would be a perfect place to start. You want to utilize the resilience of your body and of your social network, and that should not be taken lightly.
So this will show my bias, but I think that if right now everybody makes an effort to figure out what their patterns are, what are they doing in their life right now that's associated with what health outcomes, then if there's a change in the environment, you're not going to associate every single negative health outcome with that change in the environment, because you know that was pre-existing. And then you'll have a better idea of what's actually changing in your health because you have been paying attention to what those patterns were for a while.
I'm going to go back to, I think you guys are doing a really good job of trying to do something about this, because it's a pristine, beautiful area that is mostly not contaminated, and it should stay like that. And so keep up the good work, and try to maybe reach out to the universities for the health impact assessment. Not that health impact assessments are the panacea either, but they do address some of these questions that have not been answered or have not been asked sometimes.
Okay, I guess I'm next. So following up on Dr. Rule's comment, I hope that some of the university speakers might be able to point us in the direction of reputable firms that could carry out such a health assessment, since we haven't been successful thus far. My question now is mostly to Drs. Wilson, who's not up on the panel, and Dr. Rule. Rockwool has agreed to place air monitors at several sites. Would we be able to get a list of sort of criteria that we would need in those air monitors from you so that we can request the most useful air monitors from the company?
Sure, I think we can do, I don't know, Jacoby, if you want to come, but I think we can do, give a list of recommendations, but unfortunately, I mean, why isn't the industry doing the monitoring?
That's right.
I mean, they do have the money, and they do have, right, the resources, so they should be doing it. But who is monitoring those monitors, right? So the environmental protection agencies should be doing at least a little bit of the work. Okay. I don't know what you think.
Yeah. Actually, this is probably a good time to get all of the speakers up at once, and we can start asking questions of everybody. If we could have all of you.
I agree with Anna that we can give them a list of what types of monitoring they should be doing, but she's exactly right. We're the regulatory agencies in this process. because it's like, oh, we're giving you this is monitoring as a community benefit because we're going to be poisoning you. So we're basically monitoring the poison. That's right. Right? So y'all be happy with these monitors. You know how much poison and the dose. That just didn't work with my brain. So who owns the data? And who owns the data? You know, who owns the data? So I think one of the things, let me just be succinct with this. NEJAC, we came out of a report on community-driven air quality monitoring last year. So anybody wants to just remind me to send it to you. And we talked about the issues of transparency, data ownership, and making sure that the data, because this is the thing about data, and I think the panelists said this, you get all this data, what does it mean? You're already stressing me out because you're dumping on me. Now you're giving me this data that I don't understand when it comes to risk communication and risk management, risk aversion. So that has to be the regulatory agencies and your health department and your universities providing some feedback on actually what does this mean for me so I can actually navigate this data, I can do something with it. It's sort of the whole report back. So I'm gonna be quiet, but yes, to answer the question, we can help with that.
My question has to do with a little bit more administrative. What excess capacity do we currently have in our system to treat increase in respiratory disease in children and adults? So I know we're talking about Jefferson Hospital, and my concern is that if we do have increase in the respiratory illness in both children and adults, what excess capacity do we have before we start to have negative health effects overall in our population?
Well, you know, here in Jefferson County, internal to the county, you know, there's some good primary care physicians that are working really hard all the time. And patients that have chronic conditions take a lot of time. Matter of fact, I think any of you would say 15 minutes for a visit encounter is really not enough, regardless of whether you're healthy or not. It's not looking good. You know, I mean, that's my personal opinion. Okay, you know, I think sometimes systems wish they could be more reactive than they, you know, and responsive than they can be. But the reality is, you know, we don't have enough physicians. We don't have enough respiratory therapists. We don't have enough caregivers. And then, you know, a critical access hospital is important, but we don't have the capability to ventilate kids, you know, so those are going to be transported out of the county. So we have a pulmonologist that comes, I think, 1/2 day a week to Ranson. So, and that's for adults. Kids have to travel, though I hear telemedicine is going to give us some more opportunities, so that's an area that can grow. And they are trying to hire more pediatricians. I think there's 6 that are starting in the next year between Jefferson and Berkeley County, but it's not easy.
I have a question for Joseph. Since you are an architect, and I've been studying the area of LEED certification, you know, Rockwell is a multinational company, $1 billion. They basically have been marketing their product as clean and green. It's basically just greenwashing. Mm-hmm. And I want to know how we can basically go after their LEED certification of their products, because people are driven by capital, and if you take their capital away from them, you take their power.
Okay, so there has been some thought on this already. One thing that blew by on my slide is that the products are not themselves certified. It's more about how products are applied in the overall architecture and what the end result is. So in other words, if I design something like this, and it has this insulation in it, and it saves 30% more energy, that's what LEED is about. But now we're beyond LEED. We're now going into the next era of building efficiency, which is zero net energy. Hopefully more and more, you'll be hearing about this. There are some such buildings already in the country, and there will be more. These insulation products are very important for that, and many of them are very, very tight and rely on technology to move the air around. But the point is that some of them are certified. One of them is the Living Future Institute, and they certify individual products. They're on their website. You can look them all up. Rockwell products are on there, so it's LFI. and several of them do not conform to the LFI guidelines, and they are not allowed to be used in zero net energy buildings. So there is already, and that's called a red list. So LFI has a red list of disallowable products. And there are a few of them, but I think they can overcome that by changing how they make them. They should be doing that anyway. But so that's one. But the direct action that can be taken can be a boycott. There has already been some wonderful efforts from some people in this room by going to Denmark for one, building awareness of the products. Also, the green, I forget what that conference was that they went to and demonstrated out in front of that in New York, right? And that's I think the next step is to sow doubt and to build awareness among architects that they shouldn't use this product. And as an engineer, I keep trying to. I'm anticipating the questions people will have. So they'll say, why? And that's why I emphasized the connection between the embodied energy of the material and the benefit of the material. It's always going to be an economic cost-benefit, return on investment decision that people are going to make. And if we can't show scientifically that the benefit is less than the effort to, energy embodied and so forth, and the pollution and the health effects. It's this big onion that you have to unpack, or peel, I should say. And so that's how you do it. And then once there are better answers to that, then you can go to boycotting and you can do public awareness to architects. And I've started some of that. I've started it on LinkedIn. I've cast doubt on Rockwool products on sustainability LinkedIn groups.
Can I have a quick response to that? Mm-hmm. So we've done some work. There's been meetings between the schools of architecture and schools of public health about some of the building materials. Mm-hmm. Actually, NAACP held a meeting last year in Pittsburgh about building equity, energy issues, and the fact that you may improve energy efficiency, but you may increase health risk with some of the building materials. And then we've had some discussions about, we got it, to your point, we have to work with, this is not necessarily going to be as beneficial to y'all now, we got to get more health economists, economic economists to look at the true cost accounting with the healthcare costs. That's the missing part of the discussion, and we need that as ammunition when we go forward with our protesting and with the work we need to do. That's part of the things that's missing with a lot of even some of my work, like the health. We know there's health externalities, but what's the cost? With getting to the safety nets, what are the costs? And it's hard to do that, and because we haven't invested enough in talking about those things. And then that's a template that could be applied to different contexts, to different issues.
I just wanted to say, I did try to pull, this is about 6 months ago, I tried to pull the data I could looking at rates, so like an increase of 10 micrograms per meter cubed of particulate matter 2.5 in a population, and looking at our baseline prevalence rates of lung cancer, using some older data for cost analysis, which the average cost I got per year for treating lung cancer, this is from 2010, was $60,000 per year. So then basically what I could figure was about 1.6 additional cases in Jefferson County per year. So, multiply that by the 60,000 plus, compounded for growth. And then you look at the amount that's going to be charged to Medicare, Medicaid, to the state. And that's really just for lung cancer alone. There's multiple other, obviously, tons of different impacts diagnosis-wise. So it costs amount very quickly. And unfortunately, we're not bringing much tax revenue in. And then when you look at the amount of costs that are going to go out related to this, it's really does not seem like a good idea, but we have to be more vigilant, I guess. I say that tongue in cheek because it's obvious that we got the wool pulled over our eyes and purposefully.
So I just wanted to say that I've really enjoyed this and I've learned a tremendous amount, and I'm wondering how we can use this data at the BOE hearing. Is there some way that we can use what we found out and to impact the decision that's going to be made in terms of the Board of Education suit against Rockwell. I mean, how do we, I want to go forward with this. You know, I don't want to say, well, we'll monitor what's going to happen after they're built. I want to say, what do we do now so they don't get to build it?
It's Rockwell suing.
Oh, well, Rockwell suing the board. I know that. I know that.
Yeah.
But there must be some way that we can use some of this wonderful information and help write the word. Tell everybody.
You have to have a multifactorial, unfortunately. I mean, there's multiple fronts, I would assume, that need to be utilized. So, as far as I understand about the lawsuit, I mean, that's really an eminent domain question and whether that's valid or not. So, I mean, I think that is, as a parent and a Jefferson County resident, I was very pleased to see that strength come out of the Board of Ed, and I applaud them for that. But in terms of, do we need to be establishing baseline monitoring? Absolutely, yes. Now, do we need to continue to fight? Yes. And so it's a long battle. It's a lot of work to do.
Thank you.
Could I just follow up on that? There's another, I think hasn't been mentioned. There's sort of it's a kind of a contract that a lot of communities have with their good neighbor industry, and to make it a good neighbor relationship. And these agreements, I guess they're becoming more and more popular. I've only recently found out about them, but I think that's another thing that would be worth pursuing. And of course, education is a huge part of that, especially in this case. And so that would be something to engage the BOE in also. And this conversation, a lot of the data can live in that expectation.
Yeah, community benefits agreement.
Community benefits agreement. Thank you.
That's another way.
Yeah, that's it.
Some of the partners I work with have done those. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about those at the symposium too. Mm-hmm. Community benefits agreements, mm-hmm. and how you can find a way to. If you can't stop them, but you want to reduce their impacts as much as possible and force them to pay as much of the cost up front. So the cost that you've internalized, you force them to internalize those costs back through the CBAs. So that's something we'll be talking about at the symposium.
Great.
Except we can stop them here.
Stop them. I'm just saying, we got to be working multiple ways. So you're playing chess against them. So play chess well.
Yeah, I agree with that chess playing picture. And one chess figure I am still missing, and maybe somebody knows, is the shelf life of the product. I heard anything from 20 years to 40 years. So my question is, okay, now these super insulated buildings are going to have a shelf life of 20 to 40 years. Now that's not very long. And then my question is, how are we going to get the stuff out of the walls and dumped somewhere, and then we're going to put new one in there? So I think these are costs and problems that need to be considered. Thank you very much. And anybody who has an idea.
Yeah, some of those have been answered by Rockwell. One of them is that their product is recyclable. So they take the old and they throw it in the vat of molten rock and melt it again and renew it 30 years from now or 40 years instead of the landfill. Buildings do have hopefully more than 40 years. That's not uncommon these days. Is about 40 years is all you can really plan for. But the point is that this particular product actually can outlast competitive products. The most competitive, of course, is fiberglass. And when that stuff gets wet, it's just mush. It's really useless. When Rockwell gets wet, it retains its shape and efficacy, and it dries out. And that's why, it's one of the reasons why it's popular with architects, is there are a lot of building features now, and you see them, you drive around the district, you see new buildings, they have like perforated walls and things, they're very pretty. There's rock wool inside that to insulate the building, even though they're called rain walls and so forth. Can get wet, can get very hot, and so there are places where there are really no good alternatives, like in hot machine rooms, you know, like mechanical rooms in buildings that, you know, need to be fireproofed and so forth. Factory ceilings can use the rock wool. Ceiling tile looks like this, but it's made out of rock wool, and it's called rock phone.
So why don't we go to New York? Why do we have to go to
They're going to get in because we don't measure the symptomology of our children, okay? We need to scare these companies away from us by tracking health.
That's right.
Can I respond partially to that, actually?
What?
There's one more thing you need to do with this. Now, I'm not a native West Virginian, but I came here 47 years ago. So I'm still a foreigner. But I have found out West Virginia, the Supreme Court of West Virginia has never overturned a county law. Never. And you know what it takes to make a county law? A majority of people voting for the person they want to get into the county. And do you know how many people vote in your county elections? Not many. And you know how easy it is to take over a very small election? It's very easy. You know how many groups have done that so far? Zero.
Be the first.
Zero. It's time to be the first. Be the first. You can stop the next rock wall.
Zone them out.
I would like to bring this back to the world of geeky science. I think that's kind of why we're here. Back in the day, when I'm a recovering academic, first time.
Me too.
But we had this saying that if you have a new technology or a new drug or whatever it is, you randomize the first patient. What that means is somebody's in a control group and somebody is receiving the treatment. So that's the simple explanation. If you're talking about a population and a situation like we're in, please don't underestimate the value of baseline data. Because if you don't have it, you don't have anything. So you have to measure a change in something from one state to the next state in order to make a case.